Here's the number 2 thing that you and I can do that directly will affect the literacy, the writing, speaking and writing competence, and I would say the souls of our children, and that is memorized language. Memorizing language is so, so important. It essentially is the fundamental of primary education from about the beginning of recorded history until probably 100 years ago. In fact, there's an expression you might have heard if you've read books like Little House on the Prairie, Anne of Green Gables, Laddie. You would never have used this expression because you're not old enough, but you might recognize it. I have to go to school and say my lessons. You ever heard that expression? Say my lessons. No one goes to school to say their lessons. They go to school to take multiple guess tests on a tablet, right? But 150 years ago, that's how you actually showed that you knew something. And children were responsible for huge chunks of memorized language, huge chunks of scripture and poetry, and as they got older, excerpts of famous speeches. And I see with absolute clarity the necessity, the incredible value, the irreplaceable value of memorizing language, particularly during school years. And this has come under attack, right? I would be surprised if you don't feel as though you have to constantly justify why in your classical school you do memorization to parents who don't get it. They weren't raised that way, right? And by the way, if you're not doing a lot of memorization in your classical school, you might either switch or redefine yourself. Because in my view, you couldn't have a classical education without developing the skill of memory. And of course, poetry is by far one of the most important things to memorize as you're growing up. You probably know this, but I found it interesting when I learned it. Mnemosyne, I can never say that right. Mnemosyne, you know who she is? One of the titans. You know who her parents were? Uranus and Gaia. The heavens and the earth gave birth to memory. And do you know who memory gave birth to? The Muses. All of creativity stems from memory. Mnemosyne is actually the mother of both language and civilization itself. Memory is the key. And with this, I don't have to know anything because I can just ask my phone, or I don't have to remember anything because my brain will be directly connected with the internet in the near future. This mentality is so anti-truth, anti-goodness. The only way we can combat it without despair is to restore in our homes and schools the discipline of memorized language. And of course, that brings us to the point, what then shall we read to children? What should we encourage parents to read to children? And what should we memorize?